No, it's a great pleasure to be with you. I enjoyed very briefly meeting many of the ICOS folks in Paris a while back. Since then, as in everything else in life, we move on. And I have some news and updates for what's happening on our EU mission to have 100 climate neutral and smart cities, which is, maybe to explain just a little bit, one of the 5 Horizon Europe missions which this commission has launched. And I'm very proud to be the manager of this one. My name is Matthew Baldwin. I'm the Deputy Director General in DG Move. And I'm also responsible for things like road safety and sustainable urban mobility. So you can see the connection, but this is a much broader concept. We're looking for climate neutrality in all areas, energy, buildings, as well as, of course, mobility and the circular economy. And therefore, it's very important that we connect up with groups like ICOS, who've got so much experience in things like the measurement of climate emissions in cities. And it's, again, a great pleasure to be with you. So I think the first question we've asked ourselves is why we need a mission on climate neutral cities. It's worth pushing that question. It's a big undertaking. And the numbers, I'm sure you know well, 75% of EU citizens live in our cities, and that's projected to increase to around 85% by 2050. Even in the COVID era, we're sticking to those projections. More than around two-thirds of energy consumption, more than 70% of CO2 emissions globally are generated in cities. And the idea, therefore, is to come forward with this mission, which is rooted in research and innovation, but immediately moves out of that sphere into areas such as transport and energy and the circular economy. And our goal, unlike in many other areas of research and innovation policy over the years, is to deliver very concrete, specific results within a time frame. And in our case, it is to have 100 climate neutral and smart cities in the European Union by 2030, but at the same time, stressing the research and innovation aspects of the project, to ensure that all cities can be there by 2050, because of course we need to be a climate neutral continent by 2050. When we talk about this with mayors and with citizens across Europe, one of the most striking things is the co-benefits that we can deliver. And for citizens who perhaps aren't so interested in the abstract notion of the existential battle we face against climate change, the same policies can deliver lower air and noise pollution, lower congestion, fewer road deaths. I think, given the current energy crisis we're currently facing, the policies looking at renewables, looking at buildings insulation, these policies will also result in lower energy bills and better energy security as well. But most of all, it's, I think, the lovable and livable city of the future, which we're really looking to generate. This is all, of course, in support of the European Green Deal, which is by 2030 aiming to reduce our emissions by 55%. So I hope, therefore, that a large number of cities coming forward to go for 100% is going to make a major difference. And of course, the EU Green Deal is set or discussed, negotiated at EU and national level. What I think we're seeing more and more is it's implemented at local level, in cities and regions, if you like, where the policy meets the people most directly. Talking to cities across Europe in preparation for this mission, it was very clear to me that many of them have the ambition to go further. And this program is intended to help them achieve that goal of climate neutrality by 2030. So those are the 2 objectives, again, up in lights, as it were. And it's important, I think, to keep ourselves razor focused on this. There are so many distracting things that we could move off. And my goal is always to ask, is everything we're doing really aimed at helping cities get to that point? Updating you on our process, in November, we did a big call for expression of interest, backed up by a lot of webinars and explanations for what was quite a complex process. We were inviting cities to come forward, backed with a declaration or a statement of ambitions from the mayor. And we were looking for cities of more than 50,000 population to participate. We lowered the threshold for some of the smaller member states, which also, by the way, gives us the chance to test cities of the size of 10,000 up to 50,000. We had an amazing response. The call for expression of interest closed on the 31st of January. And I was always worrying, I was the worrier on the team, that we wouldn't get 100 cities coming forward. And in the end, we had 377 cities from all EU member states and 9 associated countries who've come forward with their expressions of interest. We're now in the evaluation process, and this is supported by independent experts at our Synergies, looking at the city's level of ambition and preparedness and the city's commitment to involving citizens and stakeholders. And I stress, we're not looking for a beauty contest. We're not looking for the best cities from across Europe. We're looking for geographic diversity and inclusiveness and a whole range of different cities, regions, different urban characteristics, and of course, different sizes of cities as well. This hard process is now underway, and it's much harder. We have 377 cities to choose from, but we're hoping to conclude that in the spring. I hope sometime in April, we will have our 100 cities. This is the timeline, which I've just talked through. We are getting towards the end of this timeline in the sense that we're aiming at the announcement of our selected cities by the spring 2022. And of course, the mission platform, and I'll explain more about that, begins its work with the cities in mid-2022. Next slide, please. So here are the main elements of the mission. If it's any comfort to you, I have the same problem now with the gray zones on the screen, but I can manage because I know the slides well. So to the left, if you like, we have under Horizon Europe, the mission platform, which will be the principal tool, if you like, to help cities on this path. This is run for us by the Net Zero Cities Consortium, which has been in place since the 1st of October of last year. And it comprises 35 organizations from across Europe with enormous expertise in delivering this technical and regulatory and financial advice to cities. They'll also be running for us a series of R&I demonstrators. And the mission platform, we think, is going to be an excellent opportunity for twinning and mutual learning between cities. Cities often tell me we learn best from each other. We'll also have an ongoing platform of R&I projects. We have a large budget under our disposal to build R&I projects, which we think will be of great interest to the cities involved in the mission. For example, on positive energy districts, which will be one of the big areas we're looking at for next year. The work of the mission platform with the cities is to help cities to develop these climate city contracts. This is the central element for cities that we're looking to commit. So remember that at the moment the mayors have just expressed their ambition, and when they get to working the contract and when they complete that contract, that's when the city really commits to the actions. It's not a legally binding contract, it's more of a memorandum of understanding, but we're looking for cities to think about that contract in lots of different ways. We're inviting them, if they wish, to involve their national and regional partners, and of course to involve all stakeholders in the city. And that's why innovative city governance and citizen engagement is so central. If you look at some of the cities, for example, in Sweden, where viable cities have been testing the concept of the climate city contract, we are seeing lots of little contracts spawning across the city as individual groups of citizens make their own commitments to climate change. The notion is here, then you have the climate action plan. As part of that, this is where the city sets out in detail the way it's going to reduce emissions by 2030 in order to be climate neutral. And vitally, with our assistance and the assistance of the mission platform, sets out its related investment plan, its investment strategy, because we know none of this is cheap. And that's why the mission label will be so important. We don't have enough money in the EU budget. There isn't enough money in national budgets or indeed in city budgets to deliver all of this, although we very much hope that all of these different budgets will come to the assistance of the cities. And the mission label will be the principal means of doing that. The mission label will certify that the city has got a bona fide climate neutral plan. And we know, for example, that outside finance is very interested in looking at climate neutral plans. And this, if you like, is their guarantee that this is a serious program. It'll also be useful in things like structural funds of the European Union to help cities get their hands on it, and other programs, including at the national level. Next slide, please. So there in more detail is the Climate City contract. We'll leave the slides with you so that you can have a look at them in detail, but this is setting it out in a bit more detail. I think the key point perhaps at the bottom is we see the Climate City contract as unlocking the mission label. When the city's done that, it's got its clear plan, and we think that should be enough then for other funding organizations to help the city with its plans. Next slide, please. I mentioned how important funding and financing is. Just to give you an illustration of that, an organization called Material Economics, which is also part of our consortium, did a study on the costs of climate neutrality and estimated for an average city of around 100,000 inhabitants, the cost would be around 1 billion euros. So you can see immediately how important the funding and financing side is. And these city investment plans, which will help them develop, I think will be integral for that. We're looking then to draw in support from different EU funding programs. There will be deep cooperation with the European Investment Bank Group. It won't be necessarily for every city to go straight to the EIB and look for an Ellen loan or something like that, but the EIB wants to be involved, and we'll do the initial look within the mission platform as to what kind of expertise and financial assistance the cities need, and the EIB, we very much hope and expect, will be a big part of that picture, together, of course, with national promotional institutions. We're looking also in the future at developing blending facilities or other forms of financial advisory assistance. I mentioned private investors. I don't know if many of you were in Glasgow probably, and you heard there Mark Carney announce the climate fund. There are literally trillions of euros looking for climate neutral projects to invest in, and we modestly believe that the way this project is set up, it'll help channel that money into the cities. And last but not least, the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda, which is taking place before our eyes, will also, I think, offer new opportunities to help and encourage investors to invest locally through things as city green bonds and other innovations. We're very optimistic that that is also going to be a very helpful field of action. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier synergies with other programs for cities. Many of you involved with city projects on climate change with the EU know there are many existing projects already, and we're not trying to replace any of these programs. We want to work with them and work off them to develop the things they've been doing and to be synergistic with them. The Covenant of Mayors is an absolutely splendid scheme, and we're working closely with them to help the cities that want to go all the way to climate neutrality. We also, of course, have the new kid on the block, the Climate Pact, which is working very well to establish ambassadors for climate change in different areas and different walks of European life. We're going to be building synergies with them over the coming months, and we want, if you like, cities to not feel that we're just yet another project out there. We want to help integrate these different things well together, so cities have a sort of one-stop shop. We have encouraged cities to come forward and say which initiatives they're already participating in. This was a big part of the application process. The Circular Cities Declaration, for example, if a city's been involved in that, it's already doing a lot of the kind of things that we'll need to help it achieve climate neutrality. I mentioned the mission label. The other important thing I'm sure is going to be the case, particularly when we look at the massive oversubscription to our mission, will be to have national networks which will support not just the cities in the program, but some of the cities that are not able to be part of it. Because again, we want to ensure that all cities get to be climate neutral by 2050. Next slide, please. So this is where I invite you to get in touch if you have any further questions. Again, these slides will be available to you. We sending out to many people now our City Mission newsletter, which keeps people in touch with events. If you have any questions about the mission, we have a functional mailbox here, and we now have a web page as well, which has connections, by the way, to the Net Zero Cities Consortium web page as well. Next slide, please. There we are. Thank you very much. I've raced through this presentation because I didn't know quite how much time we have, but I hope I've given us enough time and space to address the questions that you have. It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning. Back to you.
Many thanks, Matthew. That was a very interesting starting point, and I do hope we will have many questions. So to our listeners and participants, now is the time with a unique opportunity to grill Matthew about this plan. Werner, I can see you have your raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Matthew, and it's good to see you again.
Hi, Werner, good to see you.
I don't want to grill you, but
go ahead.
I'm very happy to have your initiative, and I think here the magic word is synergies, and I see a lot of synergies between your initiative and our project. In particular with the work package 1, I'm supposing you are not, you have not read the grant agreement, but I can quickly tell that we have in the work package 1, we will try to get state-of-the-art inventories for cities. And I think this scientific input may be important for you, and there might be a lot of synergies in the methodology between the two initiatives. And we also plan to analyze for those cities we have in our focus the climate action plans, and we want to co-design with the mayors or with the city government what kind of services we can bring in. And I think that's very easily to combine with your initiative and bring these ideas into your and the scientific competence into your initiative. And I think that's where we should really continue to work together and perhaps even set up some common working groups. So our doors are more than open. There aren't any doors to walk in and take our scientific expertise.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Oops, am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Thank you very much indeed for that. Those kind thoughts, Werner. Indeed, you're right about the vital nature of developing strong inventories. I know I can speak for the mission platform and who will be organizing this work for us, of course. Their strong interest to build synergies, as you said it exactly yourself, with all sorts of different outside groups. It's very important that what we do is indeed plausible and seen as credible by the broader climate community and, of course, by the investment community. And that's so that's a key part for us. Thank you very much for your thoughts. I see a question from Oksana.
Thank you very much. And I'm here actually to represent the global community. I work with the World Metrological Organization, and we are the partner on the POLE project, and we are looking at the methodologies from the point of view of scalability. If we can actually learn something which happens in the European Union and then do the upscale to the whole global community. In WMO, we pay a lot of attention to the urban agenda. We have the study group on integrated urban services, which actually articulates more on what you mentioned in your presentation on the co-benefits, like how can we create the services that can be useful for multiple communities in the city, starting from our health community, transport community, but also water management, energy management, and the stuff like that. So basically working on the implementation of the mitigation option, and we are talking the climate neutral is rather the mitigation option. We also need to put a synergy in place to look at the climate services, where the additional services on the availability of different resources, preparedness to the disaster, and the urban planning are also taken into consideration. So basically, the mitigation and adaptation should come hand in hand. And I hope that among those 100 cities which you select for your mission, you will look at the component of the adaptation as well to the climate change, because that will define your mitigation options as well. And within the POLE project, we also developed actually we developed it within WMO, the guidance on the use of observations to improve the emission inventory. We developed such a document, that's a community document, which has been circulated recently. It's now under peer review, and we hope that methodologies which we develop from the global community will be implemented through the whole project, adopted, considered how they work, and also will be useful for those 100 cities which you are working with in the mission. Thank you.
Well, it's extremely interesting to hear that, and I'd like very much to hear more about the global dimension to your work, and perhaps you could offline send me some more details about it. Just to pick up the remarks you made about adaptation, I think these are very well taken. I think some of the words we use in the climate change business to describe our actions are potentially confusing for people. When we talk about, for example, mitigating climate emissions, which of course is what we're essentially trying to do, if you look at that from the perspective of an individual city or a place, the kind of language one would use would often be to say, for our citizens who are concerned about our ability to survive the impact of climate change, we will mitigate the impacts. And there, of course, they're talking essentially about adaptation. So we are, there is, I think, a scope for enormous confusion, particularly when often in cities, the type of actions that are needed to mitigate will also be the kinds of cities that will help, which will help cities to adapt. I'm thinking, for example, of massive tree planting schemes, to take an obvious example, which both will reduce CO2 emissions, creating a carbon sink, and at the same time, of course, reduce the city's vulnerability to becoming a heat island in heat spikes. So I think all of those points are very well made, which is why we are already working closely with another of the Horizon Europe missions, which is the mission on adaptation, which has a slightly different focus. That is looking at 150 regions, so it has less of a city specific focus, but we're already looking at a number of areas where we can work closely together. Sometimes the distinction between a city and a region is not so strong, and for that reason we've had a lot of support also from the European Committee of the Regions, who are very interested in what we're doing, and we're interested in testing the concept of not just tight inner cities, but also metropolitan areas. And I'm pleased that we've had a number of applications from broader metropolitan areas and not just tight cities. So, I mean, again, from the climate change perspective, we have to work in a very unified way. We will be looking at the type of actions we are undertaking in the city mission, which is driving climate neutrality, and we're looking closely at the work of other missions, such as the mission on adaptation. And if I can mention just one more, the mission on oceans and waters. Port cities, for example, will have a major role to play in their mission, and of course in ours as well. So I can really underline what you say, the importance of synergies and the importance of really good joined up actions at the European level. And of course, we're very keen to join up effectively with what you're doing as well at the European, at the global level. Thank you.
Hugo, you have raised your hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Sorry, I'm still muted, but thank you very much for this rapid overview, Matthew. First of all, I hope we can have you again 1 year from now, because it's a challenging program, and we would be really happy or very interested to see how it goes. I have a non-scientific question for you. How will you deal with disappointment? I mean, you have a great enthusiasm raised by having so many cities, but as you said, you can do only 100. So how will you deal with that? Because I can see that there's also a danger there that all these cities raised their hand and said, we want to do this, and then they are being told, well, sorry, we will not work with you.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I risk being a bit long in answer to this. It's a problem we're wrestling with. It's a problem of success. To be very honest, I thought we would get about 150 or so applications, and therefore we wouldn't be disappointing so many cities. I think the clue to the answer lies in the twin objectives that we have, which is we want not just to have 100 cities, but we want to lay the path for all cities to be there by 2030. 2050. So even before we had this deluge of interest, we were thinking hard about how we could build out quickly from the first 100 cities and build connections with cities either that we couldn't accommodate in our program, or are working to a slightly slower timescale. There are a number of very strong cities out there who've already set their targets on 2035 or 2040, and who therefore perfectly legitimately have decided not to come forward. And we want to have the connections and the mutual learnings with those cities as well. I think the short answer to the question is that I think we're going to need to do more than we had originally planned in terms of the cities that are not in the program. It is important, of course, to ensure that there are real benefits to cities in the program. They've come forward for a reason, and we don't want to water those down. I happen to believe, and the feedback I get is this type of targeted assistance through the mission platform, working through the deep demonstrator projects, is a very attractive model, and it'll be a good program to be in. But I think what we'll need to do is strengthen the twinning, the access to what is being learned. And I'm going to urge all cities to do their climate city contracts in a very open way, again, so that others can learn from it. And then the last point I'd stress again, and this is, I think, goes to the importance of these strong national and regional networks. Why would member states want to be involved? Because these cities are taking on their back a big chunk of the climate gas reduction efforts ahead of 2030. It is in national interests to see these cities succeed and to have the network effects between different cities. And if you look at cities in Sweden, in Spain, in Greece, in Austria, and Belgium, where there's already been these efforts to create these nascent networks, the response is very strong, and the cities are really coming forward with a lot of interest, even if they're not part of the program. So I think if we get the balance right, and it's a delicate balance to strike, we'll have 100 diverse cities, again, not necessarily the best, we're looking for a very diverse group in our program, a mixture of cities that can lead that process and other cities that will be, frankly, learning more. We'll be looking for them to expand and share their activities with cities outside the program. And I mean, I can't speak for the Commission because, we've got a certain amount of resources and that's what we're working with. But I hope in the future, if this all works, we'll be able to put more resource into this program, into this platform, and be able to work in this deep and detailed way with more cities before too long. But that's for the future. Thanks for your question, Hugo. It's spot on. We'll use you as an ambassador to try to help explain to the disappointed.
Thank you, Matthew. We have one question in the chat from Hélène Batifoy. If you're here, Hélène, maybe you would like to ask your question directly? It is, have external experts actually started the evaluation of the EOL submitted by cities?
That's a straightforward question to answer. They're about to begin that work. They've been recruited by CINEA, and again, we've had to do that because we didn't know quite how many we would need, and we've had to bring in more external assessors to do this detailed work. We're very much looking forward to see their assessment. I don't know how many of you have seen the application process. There were a number of closed questions which have already given us a lot of data, but we also asked the cities in various places to write down in not too many words what their plans were, what their difficulties were, what the areas they wanted to focus on. And I think it'll be the expert assessment of these areas which will be very important. Maybe on that process, I hope that process will be completed by around mid-March. It's a lot of work for them. And then we will get those detailed assessments back, and we will then have to do the heavy lifting, particularly, I think, focused on this issue of geographic diversity. I don't think we can ask the assessors looking at individual projects to apply the diversity filter, but it'll be our job to ensure that we get a mission which is really geographically diverse. I remain keen and optimistic on having a city from every member state. And of course, there's also the associated country city dimension. and we will be applying those broader filters and trying to come up with this diverse group. But you can see, in fact, going back to the previous question from Hugo, it's a delicate business because, as you say, there will be disappointed. And because of that diversity, I'm quite sure that there will be cities that are probably better qualified to achieve climate neutrality that we won't be able to take because we're taking diverse cities from outside the group. And I've talked about that all the way through the process. And I do hope it's understood, therefore, that it's not a beauty contest or the most qualified cities win. I think we will add more value the more diverse we are across the European Union. But thanks very much for the question.
Thank you. Elena.
Yes, I'd like to pay attention because I notice you have paid attention of selection of words. You were talking about investment of around €1 billion per city, which was 100,000 people, if I remember right. And I like that you are talking about investment and not about the cost, because investment is something where you put money wishing to get it back. And indeed, you mentioned that this is going to lead to more livable and lovable cities, which probably will then lead to more happy taxpayers and blah, blah. But I wonder if from the economical perspective, if anyone has calculated the rate of return of interest, or is it in scope of your project, or can you lead me to any references of anyone who has been assessing this?
It's a great question, Ellen, and thank you for drawing my attention to it. I mean, you're right. I do try to use the word investment rather than cost. And indeed, it's implicit in this material economic study that I cited that, in fact, they're saying, I mean, confidently that there will be the payback on this $1 billion investment. And of course, I think the problem therefore becomes, how do you manage that as a city? And how do you persuade your taxpayers and this is a good deal and we should be, taking on this debt, making these investments in order to deliver the co-benefits, as well as, of course, to deliver on the obligations of climate neutrality. So it's well observed. I'm afraid I can't give you that information on the rate of interest. I'm not sure that yet exists. I suspect it'd be most meaningful at the level of city plans when they are developed. But I invite you to have a look at the material economic study, which is quite a detailed piece of work, and indeed to take contact with them and ask if they've done any further thinking about this. They are part of the consortium, and I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear your questions on that. I mean, one last point, if I may. I mean, I think one of the goals we have in helping cities put these investment plans is to attract investment from those masters of the universe, the investors, global investors, who have a specific interest in climate neutrality and who are therefore ready to accept a slightly lower rate of interest on their returns. That, of course, has been the game for some time, but that's why it's very important that we come with strong bona fide projects, which, plans for climate neutrality, which are properly certified. We cannot afford to have plans which are viewed as greenwashing or not real. To that extent, I should be very straightforward with you and tell you we have said that cities may use provision for offsets, and I know about the controversy around that. We've said that it should be really limited to 20% and not an automatic 20%. We'll be looking at those plans very carefully. And we know the competition for offset credits is very strong, and so they've got to be bona fide. The second is that we've said cities in this period need to be focusing on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, with the one exception of waste collection and waste management. We're not talking about Scope 3, and of course as quickly as I do why we need to bring Scope 3 waste within the program, because otherwise you incentivize cities to build waste treatment plants just outside the city boundaries. That's not to say we're not interested in broader issues around Scope 3. A number of cities have said they're already planning to measure them, to capture them, and increasingly to reduce them. And I think that's one of the great areas for innovation and mutual learning that we can bring on board. But I mean, so formally speaking, these are two of the, if you like, softening elements of our plans. We've always been upfront about those. The third is that we've said to cities, particularly the larger cities coming forward, there may be things you cannot do in terms of climate neutrality by 2030. For example, a big city with a major port or an airport or a heavily carbon-based industrial facility may not be able to deliver neutrality in those areas, particularly if they're not under the city's control. So there we've said, specify the areas you wish to carve out, specify with us over the coming period how much extra time they would need, but the rest then of the city would need to be climate neutral. So this is a way to get big cities into the program, even if they can't commit every neighborhood, every part of the city. Thank you very much for your question, and I'd be interested to hear back from you when on this issue. Thank you, Elena.
I'm jumping in here. From our methods, we see everything, of course, because it's related to the area and not to specific sectors. And this would be very interesting also to compare these different approaches and see, okay, what's perhaps the total emissions that can be observed, and how can this broken down in the let's say official and unofficial emissions in this approach you are running. So this would be also a very interesting synergy.
Indeed. There's lots of scope for potential. I mean, I think it's important for us to say, I mean, both with the cities in our program, both with due modesty as the Commission, and of course for the platform, I don't think we can pretend ever to have a monopoly on all the good ideas or a monopoly on all the methods and everything else. We have to learn from each other. We want this to be a massive knowledge exchange experience. We all know the timing is tight to deliver on climate change objectives. But at the same time, as we go, we've got to make sure that it's not just a mad rush to reduce emissions. We've got to ensure that the learning is dispelled as we go. And we've got to look for different methods and look for different financial innovative ways of bringing this off. It's an extraordinary business. It's the most fascinating thing I've ever worked on. And there are days I'm full of despair about our ability to really make that difference, and others I'm full of hope. And your discussion with you today is making me full of hope, I have to say.